Sam, you just mentioned and the standard setting agenda priorities, and you put the 4 different topics, okay? And it seems the number 1 is the human capital. If we relate to the ESG, that'll be the S for the social. And the climate, and probably we can relate it to the E. And how about the other 2? And the internationalizing and the emerging issue and the market input, how we can tie to the governance. So if you want to use this PowerPoint and the tie to the ESG, also the key for each company is the governance body. So how we can tell the governance body, this is very important, and what kind of decision they need to make for the company strategy. Okay, Sam, please.
That's a great question. I would definitely agree that it's, you know, that's more or less how they break down. I do think it's a little bit more, maybe it's a little more complicated than that, because you would think about, you know, human capital issues. You know, yes, human capital issues have a strong social dimension that also could have a governance dimension in terms of, you know, how employees are managed, or how the company responds to, you know, litigation or something from employees. That kind of thing. You know, reliance on an alternative workforce is something that we see in a lot of tech companies. That's a really big issue, you know, kind of across the board. So I don't know. I think that your designation is definitely correct. I think that some of the lines are, you know, it's a little bit blurry, the lines between them. And, you know, especially when you think about internationalization, for example, you know, I think that can have dimensions along all, you know, along all of those lines. For example, one thing that we see is there's different standards for sort of toxic and declarable substances in different markets. For example, in the US and Europe and in APAC, there's different sort of sets of regulations for how companies, you know, for how to sort of account for and measure toxic substances in electronics. So that's sort of an environmental issue. It's sort of something of a governance issue because there's regulations around it, and it could also be a social issue because you might see, you know, you could talk about the sort of social effects of people getting sick or something like that, or you know, communities being impacted by toxic materials or the effects of producing electronics. So yeah, very, very good question. But yeah, we are definitely sort of trying to think of all 3, and we do think that there's a lot of overlap.
Okay, so that means lots of overlap, right? And the public governments, they need to give a guideline for the company, and wherever they face overlapping, they still need to put the priority for each topic. Even overlapping, we still need this one. Number 1, number 2, number 3. You cannot do the same thing at the same time for 3 different topics, right?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And, you know, we really look to follow the market and to follow regulations rather than to lead regulations. So, you know, I think a part of our job is to look at sort of what, you know, what regulations are out there in different markets, which ones, you know, sort of make sense to or which ones are, how are they comparable across markets, and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sam. I think that Madhu, you just mentioned 3 Taiwan listed companies in the semiconductor industry. So probably, can you tell us more about each one? So the next time we read this company and report, we can understand more. So can you, because we short time for your presentation. So can you tell us more, a little bit more about these 3 companies? The time you read their report.
Sure. So one thing I do want to mention is the you know, the UMC and Macronics. I was not able to find the English version of it, so my
okay.
Mandarin is not very good at all. So I was not able to analyze it. But what I've done is I did look at TSMC, and what I found is that, you know, they're very good at creating clear structure around their reporting. They have provided contextual information wherever possible when they're disclosing the metrics. So in a very clear tabular format, they're able to they have disclosed information. And one thing I found really good about this is the fact that most of the information are contained within the same report, because that is very important from a digital data aggregation perspective. So we highly encourage people, companies, to provide information in a consolidated way as much as possible. There are situations where some companies will say, okay, for this metric, refer to some other document. So that becomes a little problematic from a digital perspective, because that information is contained somewhere else. So unless you tag all of that information in a consolidated way, from a digital strategy perspective, it becomes difficult. But with TSMC, I think they've made a conscious effort to include as much as information as possible within the same document. So that was very good. And wherever we've asked for future-looking strategy, I think they have clearly talked about that strategy. But one thing I didn't find is, Sam mentioned some of the more recent issues around supply chain, which is causing additional use of energy in ways that might not be sustainable. So the discussion around, are you meeting your targets, was something that I was not able to find. But overall, I thought TSMC's reporting was pretty good in terms of, staying true to what the SASB standards are.
Okay. How about the third company, the MXIC? That's doing Chinese version, no English?
Yeah, I couldn't find an English version, unfortunately.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, so we need to improve that. Maybe next year they will get the English version. So, okay, I will tell them that. Okay,
Well,
thank
so
you.
interestingly, so what I want to point out that is, interestingly, if you are able to, you can choose to use your own language. I mean, our recommendation or guidance is you have to disclose this to your investor base. Now, you can choose to do so in the most effective way. So if the language being in Chinese is your most effective way to communicate with your investors, that is perfectly fine. But if you think English adds value to that communication with the investor, you could choose to do so. But more importantly, if you are tagging this information with XBRL, what then becomes much easier to data aggregate, because the algorithms don't have to worry about language anymore, because it's the same tags in different languages, right? So it is very quickly possible to aggregate, English or French or Mandarin, whatever it is. It becomes the same process. So that makes it so much more easier for data aggregation perspective. So that's one thing I want to point out.